Okay, I'm going to make a start. A lot more people are going to be joining us as we go along. And welcome also to those of you who are joining us via live stream. Transform Journal, we're a journal of the radical left here in Britain, and Left Unity are proud to host this international discussion on the Black Lives Matter movement. This is the most important movement that we've seen for many years, and we're very pleased to have representatives from some of the new groups that have been formed here in Britain, as well as long-standing activists from Britain and the United States. We're joined by Bianca Ali, who's a core member of Cardiff Black Lives Matter, and with reference to that, if I can point to the backdrop there, you can see that socially distanced demonstration, BLM demonstration in Butte Park in Cardiff, which was one of the demonstrations organised recently by Bianca. Then we're joined by Maia Thomas. She's the founder of Exeter Black Lives Matter, very active in mobilising and organising in the southwest of England. Then we're also joined by Hilary Brown. She's a solicitor for the Christopher Kapessa campaign here in the UK. We're joined by Julia Wallace, a Black Lives Matter activist from Los Angeles and a militant from Left Voice. And particular thank you to Julia for joining us because it's 7 a.m. in Los Angeles at the moment. And then we're hoping to be joined shortly by Suresh Grover, a veteran anti-racist campaigner, founder of the monitoring group and a member of the Transform editorial board. So we've got lots of really fantastic and important input today. When our speakers have made their contributions, then we'll open up with Q&A. I've had some questions already submitted by email, but please do go ahead and put yours now in the Q&A box or any time during the proceedings. Don't forget also use the chat box, share links, comments, and our speakers, I'm sure, will respond if they've got a moment to do that. So thank you very much, everyone. So without further ado, I'm going to call on Bianca. Bianca, tell us how the movement is in Cardiff and what your plans are.
It's going amazing at the moment. We've had a really good turnout at every protest that we've had so far. The people of Cardiff have backed us all the way, and I couldn't be more proud of my city, to be honest. The first protest that we had was quite small. It was around 200 to 300 people, and it was just outside Cardiff Castle. I actually wasn't a member of Black Lives Matter at that moment. I just was an attendee at the protest, and I just felt like I really needed to be involved. So I spoke to the founders at the time, and they were more than happy for me to join on. And we went and organised our second protest, which is the one in your background there, in Butte Park, where we had around 3,000 to 4,000 attendees. And that one was just really impactful because I feel as though the whole city was standing together in solidarity for Black Lives Matter movement. There I read a speech on behalf of the Lord Mayor, Dan Diath, and after that we actually led a march to the Welsh Assembly. When we were there, Hilary Brown thankfully pointed out that we were stood on slate. The whole of the Senate is actually built from slate, or most of it. And the slate is from the slate that is used to build the Welsh Assembly is Welsh slate. And Welsh slate, if you don't know, was a very big trading attribute back in the slave trading times. To be stood on the Welsh Assembly talking about why Black Lives Matter and be stood on slate, it was a very ironic moment. But we are protesting for, with further research, we found that there's a place in Barry, which is in the Vale, and they have a street which is named after the Penrhyn Castle where the slate was originated from. So we're at the moment, we're going to be petitioning on this Saturday in Barry to be getting that street name removed and hopefully in place of a better name, more iconic figure, if you like. That is the next protest that we have coming up. Yesterday in Carmarthen, we marched for the monument of Thomas Picton to be removed. Thomas Picton was a slave trader. He did a, sorry, I can't get my words out, I'm getting a bit nervous. He was a very, very bad guy, obviously, a slave trader. He tortured a young girl called Louise Cauldron. He was convicted, but the conviction was overturned. So he was never, known as this bad guy, because he went on to do things within the war that put him in a certain light of being a good guy. So the statues and the monuments that are built to him now represent him as being this good man, forgetting all the bad history that he ever did. So at the moment, really pushing for his monuments to be taken down. There's quite a few around Wales. I've been doing a bit of history today, this morning myself, on his statues and things, and there's quite a few. There's one in Newport, a pub in Newport named after him. There's quite a few street names after him. There's a lot. So yeah, we're really pushing at the moment to try and get these monuments and these street names changed. Sorry, don't know really what else to say. I'll tell you about a little bit of our objectives within Black Lives Matter Cardiff. So I think maybe one of the main objectives that we have is to make sure that accurate Black Welsh history is to be taught into schools and have something to be to commemorate the Black Welsh history as well. So as I was speaking about the Thomas Picton statues, we'd really love to see something in Wales and obviously other places of the world as well that commemorate our Black history. We want to address the racial disproportionality, in prisons, and how there are more BAME people in Welsh prisons than English, because the figures are insane. We also would like to address why BAME people are more likely to be stopped and searched, tasered, as compared to their white peers. We want to provide young people with educational resources to allow them to learn about politics, policies, policing, law, activism, and various different types of subjects, so that they are equipped with the right knowledge to help them understand their rights and ask the right questions to the people in power, like the MPs and the AMs. Sorry. Other objectives, we'd like to bring light on various different injustices that are currently happening both nationally and internationally. For instance, the Shukri Abdi, and obviously Christopher Kapessa. Christopher being from Wales, so this is one that, touches home so much for us, and we really, really want to get, get all these injustices overturned. Shukri Abdi is from Manchester, which is in England, but we co-hosted a protest here in Cardiff for Shukri. We had an amazing turnout once again. There's still an ongoing petition at the moment with more than 1 million signatures, so that's amazing. There is an ongoing inquest at the moment for Shukri, so hopefully we will get some justice there. Yeah, I'm not really sure what else to say.
Okay, that's all right. You'll have lots of opportunities to come back later in response to questions and so on. If you've said enough for now, is that okay? Yeah. Well, that was really, really interesting, and your objectives and so on. I think there'll be so much resonance with that across the country and internationally. That's brilliant. Yeah. Maya, over to you.
Hi, so I'm Maia, a BLM Exeter founder. Our first protest had about 1,000 people attending in flower pots, which was amazing for Devon. Lots of people commented they'd never seen so many different minorities in one place all at once. I'll talk you through why I wanted to get involved in the first place. I moved to Devon from London when I was about 9 years old, and I realised that I shaped myself to try and fit into a community which I would never feel a part of based on my experiences here and the colour of my skin. So then I realised not everyone has a platform that they can speak out on and share their experiences. So I had to get involved with BLM here and therefore be a founder of the movement in Exeter. Some of my experiences here have just been, for example, my brother's got followed home numerous times and people have told him, oh, you can't afford to live in this area, and followed him in their car down our driveway. In my school, I was told every day that I wasn't allowed my natural hair, I wasn't allowed braids. So every day I was going to school worried about what they would pick up on about me naturally, rather than being able to learn, being as bright and able as all the other students, but they would for some reason just focus on my hair all the time. In shops, for example, I've been followed a lot. I've had people say, oh, you're going to buy something, you're going to buy something, just because I've walked in for 1 minute and not picked up something initially. So we really thought that we needed to organise the protests in Devon just to educate people, because a lot of people here, not just ignorant, but a lot of them just don't realise that racism occurs across Devon and the whole of the Southwest. So education was always a founding point in our protests. We allowed an open mic session where lots of Black members and different ethnic minorities came up to share their stories and experiences so that people could learn firsthand about what's happening. So since the protest, I've written various articles. I've got a podcast with Radio X called The Devon Discussion, where we're focusing on Black Lives Matter at the moment as well. I've been approached by over 20 schools to go in to speak about Black history, my experiences in Devon, just to allow pupils to know that it's okay to share it and that you can approach people on the subject. The first school we're speaking to is actually coming up on Tuesday as well, which is really good. As BLM Exeter, I supported the Bakers Against Racism charity fundraiser, where we raised £2,600 for a charity here as well that helps fight racism in the communities and celebrate multiculturalism. So that's also a really positive aspect of what we've been doing. Then we've mainly just been wanting to approach different schools and make them realise that it's mandatory for them to have a hard line against racism, and different universities, not just in Devon, but across the Southwest, and then broadening out into other areas. So I've also been involved in many international Zoom conversations with different founders of BLM groups so that we can network together, because we realise it's not one fight for one area. Everyone needs to connect together and then we'll have a bigger impact. So on these calls, we've been having discussions with leaders from different movements in India, in China, in France, over here as well. So it's just great because we realise that networking is also a key part of this movement, because there's only so much one person can do in one small area. But if we all connect together, that's when we'll receive more positive change. Since that as well, our BLM Exeter movement group has over 3,000 members. So we've just got a safe space for not just Black individuals, but all minorities to have their voices heard and feel that they can be celebrated, and that not everyone will look in a bad way, that people do want to hear what they say, that their opinions are important. So that's the main aim of the group, really, because if you don't create that safe space initially, then it's harder for Black members and other minorities to get involved in the community because they don't feel safe to do so. So before we can do anything, we wanted to create a safe platform, and then we can start moving into the community, going into schools and leading on from there, really. Yeah, that's it.
Thanks very much indeed, Maia. That's brilliant. I'm going to now remind everyone, people who've just joined us, please put your Q&A up as you want to. Don't forget the chat. I'm now going to turn to our next speaker, Hilary Brown. Bianca's mentioned already this campaign, which is a big feature in Wales, the Christopher Kapessa campaign. Hilary is a solicitor for that campaign. So Hilary, over to you. And if you put your camera on, if you don't mind. but if you don't want to, that's okay.
I'd rather not, because I'm dressed in my gardening clothes. Okay.
All right, no problem.
But I'm absolutely delighted to be here with you, and I just wanted to take a moment to really pay tribute to Maia and to Bianca, who are two young people new to activism, and it really is these young people who are going to be making a change. We desperately need their enthusiasm and their energy, and they've stepped forward in a way that, you know, the Black Lives Matter movement enables people to step forward and be brave about issues that they have had to suffer. You've heard Maia say that she faced difficulties in school about her hairstyle, and being the only Black student in that school, that must have made it absolutely difficult for her to step forward and stand in solidarity with, you know, Black children all over the United Kingdom who were facing the same trials and tribulations. So I really pay tribute to the young people of the Black Lives Matter movement. We can't do this without you, and I salute you. Bianca mentioned the Christopher Kapessa campaign, and for those of you that don't know, Christopher was a young Black boy who lived with his mum and 6 siblings in a South Wales valley in Wales. The family moved originally from East London, and when they came to the South Wales valleys, immediately faced hostility, racism in all its forms. The family were verbally abused, they had swastikas, they had other racist paraphernalia posted through their door, they had dog excrement posted through their door. The youngest, the little girl who was 5 years of age, was urinated on by a teenager. Christopher, who sadly ended up dying on the 1st of July last year, was attacked by an adult, and week in, week out, the family reported these horrendous incidents to South Wales Police. And to date, with a very recent exception of a woman being charged with a racially aggravated public order offence, no charges were ever preferred against anybody for carrying out the catalogue of abuse that they subjected this family to. In May of 2019, the family's house was burnt to the ground under very suspicious circumstances. And again, nobody has been held to account for that, and an investigation did not happen because the police decided that it was yet again just an accident. The family were moved eventually to their current location of Fern Hill in the South Wales valleys. And the tale that has been told many times was that Christopher went out on the 1st of July to play football with some new friends. And he ended up going to a river. Christopher was a non-swimmer. And Christopher ended up getting into the water and sadly drowning. The young people that were there with Christopher were all white people. Christopher was the only Black boy there. And Christopher's mother was informed initially that Christopher was missing. And eventually she was taken to the hospital, where she discovered that he had been taken to the hospital and pronounced dead. And within 24 hours, the death of Christopher was being treated as no more than a tragic accident. I went to the house within 24 hours and was horrified to learn that the scene had not been sealed off. It was still open to the public. I was horrified to learn that at that time, only 4 out of the 14 or so young people had been interviewed. And yet the police had concluded that this was no more than a tragic accident. I was horrified to learn that while Christopher was drowning, there were images of him being sent around various social media platforms, and yet the police had decided that it was not appropriate to seize anybody's mobile phone. I have worked as an activist and long-time campaigner for 40 odd years, and I've worked for a very long time with Suresh Grover with various campaigns, and I immediately knew that it was important that this was not covered up in Wales. And so I, on the first day, contacted Suresh and involved the monitoring group, because at least we knew that there would be anxious scrutiny, external scrutiny, and there would be no cozy relationship between police and others in an attempt to cover up the catalogue of failures that this family had faced since arriving in Wales. Now, we've done everything expected of us whilst the police continued to investigate this matter. We were silent. We kept remote and distant from the area, as well as having to try to support the family. We spoke very little to the press. We did not want to be accused of interfering with the investigation. And so we were absolutely horrified on the 19th of February of this year to be handed a letter from the Crown Prosecution Service telling us that although there was enough evidence to show that the threshold of manslaughter had been met, it was not in the public interest to charge anybody with Christopher's manslaughter. What does that tell us about the value of a life of a young black boy today in the United Kingdom? And so today is quite a poignant day for us, because it is tomorrow that we will receive the reviewed decision of the Crown Prosecution Service, because we assisted to submit a victim's right of review, and we know that the case has now been looked at again by a senior prosecutor, and that new decision is going to be delivered to us tomorrow. All we have is hope that Christopher will get justice. We continue to hope that the Crown Prosecution Service will do right by this young man and will bring justice to Christopher's family. But if we do not get justice tomorrow, we are prepared to go further and challenge by way of a judicial review in the High Court. And we absolutely thank BLM for jumping with us immediately to ensure that this is not swept under the carpet, it's not forgotten about, and that it stays current in the minds of everybody. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Hilary. That was deeply moving and deeply shocking, and I'm sure all of us on the call today want to send our condolences, our deepest condolences and solidarity to Christopher's family. So thank you for sharing that with us. Our next speaker is Julia Wallace. Julia is a Black Lives Matter activist from Los Angeles, and she's also a militant from Left Voice. So Julia, over to you.
Good morning, everyone. Oh, it's not morning where you're at, so sorry. It's 7 in the morning here in Los Angeles, but I'm glad to be here, and I appreciate all the contributions people have made. I have been an activist in the struggle against racism and police violence for many years. I think it's 20 this year, and I'm actually not a member of BLM Los Angeles, but I am active in the movement for Black Lives. I'm active in the fight in the kind of larger Black Lives Matter movement. And I just appreciate the words that people have shared. So much of this movement that is happening now is a culmination of all the abuses and injustices that we've suffered as Black people across the diaspora, as well as a culmination of the resistance and the movements and the continuity of resistance that's happened against that oppression. So hearing the story about the family, it's also, I wanted to just make a point clear that the racism and vigilantism, which it sounds like these families have suffered, is endorsed by the state, which is based on racism of capitalism and colonialism and imperialism. And so the fact that the police have dragged their heels, they don't know, they're not sure. We know that with other communities that they would not be that way, that they would put all their efforts into finding out who did this, why did they do it, and all that stuff. But the reason why they're not is because the police themselves are white supremacists. The police themselves have racist views. And even if they don't have actively racist views, they defend those who have racist views, because the police in themselves defend a system based on racist oppression. You know, and particularly just drawing the connection between the historical connection between the US and the UK. The cotton that was picked in the United States was used in the textiles of the English Industrial Revolution. And so we wouldn't even have the development of this Industrial Revolution centered in the UK without the enslavement of Black people in the US who were picking the cotton, and the enslavement of Black people in the UK, as well as the appalling conditions of workers in general during that time period. I just wanted to also speak on kind of what's been developing in the United States with Black Lives Matter and the protests that have been happening. So protests have reduced, and you know, a lot of places they're still continuing. There's still protests that are happening, still action, still statues being ripped down. People are still occupying different political spaces, but the state repression has increased. If folks have heard about Portland, Oregon, what it seems to have happened is that Trump had I don't know who he had contacted, I think the police union, which is an oxymoron because the police are not a union, they're a Klan meeting. But they were contacted, and he sent in federal troops to grab people up. Some of them disappear, that is, not say where they are, and beat and repress them. And the governor claims he didn't know, and the mayor of Portland claims that he didn't know. So this means that Trump used his executive powers to grab people, kidnap them, and disappear some of them, without even some of the officials that they themselves are complicit in this system. So that's a really terrifying thing to happen. At the same time, with the movement of so many youth, Black-led youth, but also a multicultural movement. It isn't in past protests where we've had mainly Black people fighting for Black people. This movement has been multi-ethnic, but has also been Black-led, and particularly the fights of Black women have played a role that's been really courageous. But now what's happening is kind of a move towards trying to get people to kind of go back and support the Democratic Party. As people know, in the US, There's two political parties, basically, two capitalist parties. Both of them are rife with racists and rapists, like both of the presidential candidates, Joe Biden and Trump. They both represent the police. So we have, open white supremacists in the Republican Party, police chiefs like Chief Bratton from New York, who was particularly abusive in New York and in Los Angeles. He's, an active member of the Democratic Party. And so those of us who have been in the streets, who have been participating, I think we really need to kind of discuss with each other and strategically organize with each other, not just against, against Trump, but Trump isn't the creator or the originator of a lot of these racist policies. They've existed for an incredibly long time. So I think we need to organize ourselves to form like a politically independent group that's based on workers and that's based on oppressed people, and not be in the same political party as these cops and these capitalists and these bigots and these imperialists, because we have nothing in common with them, and in fact they're intentionally organizing towards our demise. The other thing I wanted to point out is that there's also been worker struggles that have been happening because of the pandemic. People have been forced to go back to work even in unsafe conditions. And so a lot of workers, precarious workers, people who don't have unions, and unionized workers have been taking positions to defend basically our right to live and to work safely. And I think that those movements, we really need to try to coalesce them. Tomorrow, there's supposed to be, it's called a strike for Black Lives, that's being organized by several unions, the Teamsters Union and my union, which is SEIU, Service Employees International Union, and I'm part of Local 721, which is a union of social workers and case managers. So but it's not really a strike, it's more like coordinated protest. But I think really we should have a strike for Black Lives, have a strike against racism, and use our power as the labor movement, as workers, to take a stand against racism and against these cops. I'm part of a group called SEIU Drop the Cops, because we want to disaffiliate. The police should not be in the same union as us. For example, there's a man, Rayshard Brooks, who was murdered recently, and the cop who murdered him is a member of SEIU. How is that possible to have a union with people who kill you? How can we defend them? How can we defend their contracts? It's completely unacceptable. So there's a group of us who are rank and file members who are fighting for disaffiliation, and we're also fighting against the police as union members, because we really have power, especially for folks like myself who are still working. I work with the homeless communities, people who are homeless in Los Angeles. We really have power in a lot of ways to shut down the economy, and to take power as workers to fight them. So I think that's one point I wanted to make. And also I wanted to just, again, kind of extend my solidarity to the folks that have been organizing, that have organized these 1,000-person protests. It's really an incredible historical moment, and we're on this historical precipice. And I think we really need to think outside the box, and demand that our fellow workers take positions to defend us. We defend each other against racism and bigotry. I'm sure, there's going to be more austerity in the United States. They have been giving trillions of dollars to the wealthiest people and corporations in the history of the world. And they've given them our money. And now they're going to expect us to take cutbacks, rollbacks, and layoffs to pay for the money that they gave these rich ass people, and it's totally unacceptable. So I feel like we really need to also have an internationalist perspective. So the fights that are happening in the UK are linked to the fights in the US and all around the world, because it's not unique. The racist killers that get away with murder, it's not the first time, and it's probably not going to be the last time. But if we can get together, then maybe we can intimidate them and make them think twice before they do that again. And especially seeing so many other people who don't live that struggle being part of that struggle. I don't know, in racist countries, or countries built on racism, that's like their worst nightmare. So I just wanted to make a few notes on that. I appreciate what folks have to say, and you know, this is a struggle that's been continuing. In a few weeks, it will be Black August. In the United States, that is a holiday that was created by George Jackson and other Black revolutionaries that were incarcerated. It was also commemorating the Nat Turner insurrection and the Attica prison uprising that happened in the 1970s. So we're standing on the shoulders of other revolutionaries that have come before us. And I think we have to have, in spite of the attempts to co-opt, to destroy, to repress, we have to know that history is on our side, and we're going to keep fighting until we destroy all these forms of repression and exploitation. So thanks so much for what everyone had to say. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much indeed, Julia. That's a really brilliant perspective for us. It's fantastic. Now our next speaker is Suresh. Suresh, are you there? I can see your name there. Can you hear us?
I'm unmuted.
He's not muted. Suresh?
He is muted.
Can you unmute yourself, Suresh? I don't think you are muted, but we can't hear you. Ah, okay. Can you unmute yourself now? Should be the icon in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. Yeah, okay. Okay. Suresh, we can't hear you. I'm going to ask Andrew to liaise with you on the technology side, and while that's being sorted, I'm going to take a couple of questions for our panelists. So, okay, if well, Suresh is getting sorted, if I can ask our speakers so far to, if you want to come back and so the audience can see you, or you can be incognito. Oh, there you are. Hi, Maia. Thanks very much. Okay, and obviously Bianca and Hilary, that's up to you. Hang on, I'll just shut the door because otherwise I can hear Andrew talking to Suresh. Okay, so I've got the first question here. This is from Teo. Teo says, the Black Lives Matter movement has been a fantastic opportunity for people to learn new and important information. Which information has impacted you most and why? Anyone want to comment on that? What have you heard?
Yeah,
what information have you
I
had?
think mainly hearing stories from people younger than me and other people in the areas that I live, to realize that the struggle's not just with me, it's with so many people here, but they haven't had the chance to speak up before, or they've felt unsafe to do so. Even people saying that they won't attend a protest because they're scared their employer might do this, or they might lose business from their own companies. So they're so afraid to speak out on just the truth. So I think hearing the first-hand experiences of people around me of all age groups is what's impacted me most and just made me want to do more so that the younger generations don't have to go through the same thing.
Bianca, you want to comment there?
Yeah, for myself, I think the amount of injustices that have been like brushed under the rug, so to speak, or hidden rather, through systemic racism, the amount of stories that are now being brought to light that were never brought to light before. I think that is probably the biggest like wake-up call that I've had, and yeah, just learning about all them injustices for myself.
Okay. Julia?
Yes, I think for me, I mean, I'm not a stranger to the issues of the police, to racism. You know, I've been shot with bean bags and tear gas, all that stuff, all the craziness. But what has really kind of like, I knew it, but it internalized it more, is that when you have the power of the masses behind you, stuff changes way quicker. The fights that people have had against statues, against the Confederate flag, to reduce the amount of money in the police budget, none of that is new. That's not new. But now that, you know, the wealthiest people are afraid, they give up the money. They give up the concessions. Oh, Black Lives Matter. Disney has a Black Lives Matter thing. Amazon, not to, you know, the fact that a black woman who worked for Disney died in her car because they didn't pay her enough to be able to have a home and enough food. Now Disney is shelling out money. Oh, here we go. We love Black people. We love Black struggle. Like, that is nothing to do with the change in their minds or in their hearts. It's the threat of Black people leading a multi-ethnic uprising that is intolerant of the racism and exploitation we have existed under for so long. And that really, I really have internalized like our power, because they've made so many excuses. We don't know, we're not sure, hand wringing. And so I just hope that we continue to feel our power and just don't accept, you know, the trifles that they're going to attempt to placate the movement with. So, but yes, it's very inspiring to see these people intimidated, afraid, who are used to being the people who are intimidating and creating fear, to seeing that our power can really change things in a very meaningful way. So
thanks Julia. Hilary, did you want to come in on this?
Yeah, I just wanted to say I'm really enjoying the mobilization of young people. And I'm really enjoying the opportunities that they are taking to engage far beyond their own shores and with people all over the world, because they now have social media that they can link up so quickly with people all over the world. I'm enjoying the young people's energy and enthusiasm. And I'm actually enjoying the number of people that we have seen come along to protests who are saying and calling out white privilege. I'm enjoying seeing people making demands in a different way. We've done the letter writing, as Julia has said, you know, we've done all of the formal stuff. It's a different time now. And I'm enjoying seeing the local authorities and the decision makers now accepting, reluctantly, but accepting that they have to listen to the demands of this movement, because this movement is a movement and not a moment. And I quite enjoy the fact that local authorities and other decision makers are now engaging over various social media platforms as well. So the new energy, I think, is a long time in coming. And I think it's tragic that it took the death of George Floyd to consolidate everybody's insistence that the time is now to come together in unity and challenge generations of injustice. So I'm happier in these times now than I have been for many years.
Okay, thanks very much, Hilary. Be a lot of support for that perspective, I'm sure. So our next question, I think this is really one for Bianca and Maia. This is from Sam Draper, who's one of BLM Exeter's founders, along with Maia. She says, my question is to all the BLM founders in the UK. How can we approach them to network with them to make future plans for the movement? Brilliant question. Bianca, can you have a go at that one?
Yeah, of course. Well, funny enough, I've literally just added Maia on Facebook as we were having this meeting. So yeah, just social media. We've obviously got Facebook page, Instagram page, it's Black Lives Matter, Cardiff and Vale. And obviously we all have personal Facebooks as well. Mine is just my name, Bianca Ali. So yeah, if anybody from the UK and the US, anywhere else, wants to, you know, team up and stuff and make these protests bigger and heard more, then yeah, just add us on Facebook, and we're more than happy to work with any other organisations moving forward, definitely.
Thanks, Bianca. Maia?
Yeah, I would say also it's about finding the opportunities and the spaces to have your voice heard beyond the protest in your own area. So there are a lot of international Zoom meetings with people from all different countries. I'm doing one later today with people from Oxford, different places over here in other countries, of all the BLM leaders of movements in specific areas. So it's just thinking about what you can do beyond the protest, because networking, and as we've said, coming together is the way that we will fight this and the way that change will be implemented. So that's what I would say, just look for more opportunities beyond your area, connect wherever you can, and just listen to what people have to say and accept them to join on board with the cause, because we're all fighting for the same thing.
Thanks, Maia. And the next question, I think, links into that, what you're talking about, making the links and so on. It's from Bradley, who says, we see that this is a global movement now coming up in many, many different countries. Are there any plans, or is there any ongoing international links and cooperation to pull the movement together internationally? Julie.
Well,
oh, sorry. Yeah, Maia.
No. Yeah, well, that's what we've been having the Zoom calls about, to see how we can all come together and say, if we did a protest for the exact same thing, but across the world, all linked together. So that is what is in the planning, basically.
That's very positive. From the US perspective, Julia, have you got any initiatives on the kind of international links coming up from the States?
Yes. So we recently had an international discussion on Black Lives Matter with people in Brazil, in France, and in Argentina. And there were other countries that participated, but I think mainly our speakers were from those countries and other countries. I write the leftvoice.org, the publication that I write for. We publish in 14 different countries, and we write in 7 different languages, really to be able to be a mouthpiece for the movement and different movements that are happening. For example, unfortunately, since George Floyd was murdered, the police have still been killing people. And so we are talking about that. We activists who are part of the struggle, for example, for his name was Andres Guardado, who was killed in Los Angeles by the sheriffs. So not by LAPD, by LASD, the sheriff's department. And so highlighting those reports, translating them into different languages so people in other parts of the world can read about it. And also we work with a group called Quilombo Vermelho, which is the red quilombo. For people who may not be aware, the quilombos in Brazil, where most of the diasporic Black people were were trafficked to, kidnapped and trafficked to, those folks would leave the areas of the plantations and form their own communities. And Quilombo was called that. And so Quilombo Vermelho means red Quilombo. So it's a group of people who identify with Marxist socialist ideas and who are also Black. And we work with that group as well, and other groups who are, socialists and fighting for Black liberation, to really kind of globalize our experiences. A lot of the things that people experience in other countries, we experience in the US. So to highlight those experiences, translate what people write so that you can read what other activists are saying in other languages, and really kind of be it. This was an international event about BLM, but to kind of build more links so we're normally in contact with each other. So when something happens, we can do something quickly around the world. The McDonald's is around the world. Why shouldn't our political movements be as coordinated and organized? Not like them, but like organized and creative with a similar message.
Thanks, Julia. I'm going to break into the Q&A now because we're joined by Suresh Grover. Welcome, Suresh. It's good to have you with us. I introduced you earlier on, but I'm going to repeat that for people who've joined subsequently. Suresh, known to many of us, is a veteran anti-racist campaigner, founder of the monitoring group, and he's also a member of the Transform editorial board. So, Suresh, we're looking forward to hearing from you. Over to you.
I'm just trying to make sure. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, great. Listen, really sorry for being late, but I've had problems with the network, and I've just got in now, and I'm really sorry I missed everyone. I think I know what Hilary would have said because I work with her all the time, and I've been working with her on the Christopher Kapessa case in Wales. But I just want to analyze some of the drivers and momentum that has taken place as a result of the Black Lives Matter, and see how we can learn from it and what it represents. Let me just start by saying that despite the restrictions on citizens, given the COVID-19 guidelines, and it's been an exceptionally busy period for anti-racists in the UK. As the director of the monitoring group, we worked tirelessly going out of London, speaking at meetings. We have such a heavy caseload of people who are coming to us because of racial violence and of policing problems. Over the last month, since the advent of the emergency guidelines, we've had a 250% increase both in our campaigning capacity as well as our advocacy capacity. And we I think it's such a alarming period because of COVID and the consequences that we're facing as a result of the government response to it. But it's also a very inspirational movement and period because of the trust of how the BLM hashtag movement has galvanized people on a global scale. So we've seen demonstrations, not just in London, obviously masses of demonstration. I think something like 430 demonstrations in the United States in just 1 month, but demonstrations in this country across the UK. I've been to, I think, over with Hilary, maybe 5 or 6 demonstrations in Wales, but in other parts of the country. And we're seeing a very highly active, rejuvenated, new involvement of young people within these movements. And we want to understand why that has taken place and why the conditions have allowed for that galvanizing of a Black Lives movement, which rightly so, is unapologetically Black and created by 3 women in 2015 as a result of the murder of Diane and the lack of any accountability or conviction in that murder. And we need to work out how far we've moved forward in the UK and I suppose in the US. And I just want to analyze some of the critical factors I think are important for us to understand. The issue of systemic structural racism was raised very forcibly by us, and as a result of the Stephen Lawrence case, murder of a 19-year-old in 1993, which led to a public judicial inquiry because of police failures. And his conclusions in 1999 made it abundantly clear that the failure for police to convict anyone was principally because of institutional racism. Yet, in those last 19, 20 years, we haven't seen a single police force that has taken action against officers because of institutional racism, or a government body that has found a single officer or an institution or police force guilty of institutional racism. There has been no movement on systemic failures, whether it's with the police or with any statutory agencies, whether it's local authorities, social services, even the health service. That problem has been raised by Black and brown groups throughout this country over that period, and since the advent of the first migration of immigrants in this country from 1958 onwards, or just after the war, in larger numbers. That problem has been there. It was certainly raised when the uprisings took place in this country 40 years ago. Next year would be the 40th anniversary of the 81 rebellions, when we had public order disturbances, fires in 30 cities, and we participated in those rebellions and in these public disturbances. And when Scarman reported on the Brixton disorders, he dismissed the idea of institutional racism and said the lack of any form of accountability or police action to protect Black communities, or to take action and murder or kill or discriminate against Black and brown communities in this country was simply due to a few bad apples. But we overcame that through the Lawrence inquiry. And since then, since 1990s, there have been 1,570 deaths in police custody. 24% of them are against Black and brown people. We haven't had a single conviction of a police officer. We've had 199 race murders. Only 2% have led to what we would call victim satisfaction or family satisfaction. So there hasn't been a sea change in how the police have dealt with the issue of systemic racism. What we've seen is an increase in stop and searches of Black people, which were 3 times as much as white people, for example, in the 1990s. In the COVID period, it's actually 9% higher than white people. And for people of color, it's about 3.5 times more than white people. We've seen throughout the whole criminal justice system process, from the time of stop and searches to the arrest, to the people being charged, the manner in which they're charged, the sentences they get, the guilty pleas they are pronounced on, the incarceration of Black and brown people in this country is totally disproportionate as far as Black, brown communities are concerned. So you have, for example, more Black people in prison at the moment than in universities. You have, in the Youth Offenders Institute, although Black people are only 3% of the population, something like 25% of prison, youth juvenile institutions are Black. 50% are young people of color, although we're only 14%. That disproportionality is very, very high. The last conviction we had of a police officer who killed a black person was 50 years ago, of David Aliwalia, killed by 2 police officers for charged with manslaughter. They hounded this homeless person for something like 2.5 years, arrested him countless of times. He was beaten up in the cell. His charge sheet didn't even put his name on. They had WOG on it as a derogatory name. They only got 2.5 years for manslaughter. Sienda Magasa, a case that I'm dealing with at the moment, charged with previous bodily harm, racially attacked herself, wrongly charged, has received 4.5 years in prison only a couple of months ago. The disparity is mind-boggling, it's stark, it's brutal, it's naked, and what has happened is none of the mainstream political parties or the government has ever held the police or the criminal justice system agencies to account on this nation of systemic institutional failures, despite the fact that they were found guilty of it in 1999 in a public judicial inquiry called by the Labour Party, the Labour government, and where they said those recommendations which existed should have been implemented. The point I'm making is we've had many George Floyd moments in this country. Lawrence's was one of them, but nobody acted on it. Grenfell shows a complete, naked, disproportionate amount of deaths, killings took place in the center of London, at the richest borough, the most anglicized borough in London, Kensington and Chelsea, the richest, the most prosperous. 72 migrants killed in a fire which could have been prevented, deliberately housed in situations and in accommodation which is below par, put in that tower of housing because it's cheap, cladding put on it because it's for sure rather than because it's safety value. Yet the issue of race, which is so obvious, has never been tackled by anyone, including the inquiry. And we've made representation campaign. The families of the 72 people who were killed have said months and months ago that race should be a factor. Totally dismissed. The institutional form has never been tackled properly. And it's something that the Black Lives Movement have raised it to the fore and above the surface. And that's why you have the lived experience of Black, brown people in this country beginning to emerge and beginning to support the Black Lives Movement, despite the fact that it is unapologetically Black, and rightly so. The second aspect, I think, which is very important to understand, is that the Black hashtag movement is a movement which has a non-hierarchical structure. Anybody can use that hashtag. And in this country, as in other countries, young people have taken the initiative of just calling a Black Lives Movement demonstration. They own it, they run it. It doesn't have to have a political structure. It doesn't have to have an organizational structure. There are weaknesses in it, but there are strengths. It galvanizes large amount of people who do not normally come into organized political forums and debates into that forum of discussion. And so there are disadvantages in it, obviously, because anybody can use a Black hashtag and call it a Black Lives Movement. So at this moment, although the movement is very young in the United Kingdom, there are already questions on who should own it, how it should be run, and what the formation of different strands of the Black Lives Matter should run it. But it is an invigorating, non-hierarchical, engaging process with people who feel the need to deal with it but haven't been part of an organized grouping. The third aspect I think that we need to understand, which I think is very critical, is its raison d'etre and its life and soul is based on the exposure of police brutality through social media circles, the killing or lynching of George Floyd was filmed and showed to thousands of, not millions of people on YouTube. So have been other murders before that in 2014. You've had a spectacle of Black men and women, including grandmothers and children, filmed whilst they're being killed. And the spectacle is horrific, and it's brutal, and it shows a lynching taking place in lifetime. And I think the thrust of the Black Lives Movement is not to normalize that process, although it's become normalized. And it shows the repugnancy of it on that video scale. So the knowledge base is massive, the interest is massive, but it shows a lynching taking place by uniformed officers. And I think that is very moving, but repugnant at the same time, where it shouldn't be normalized. But the extension of people seeing that brutality in their living homes when they've closed their eyes to the lived experience of Black people is a new moment in history, started in about 5-6 years ago through the advent of social media, etc. And it has created this feeling of solidarity with the lived experience of Black communities. I think the level of incarceration is another factor that we need to understand and we need to acknowledge and we need to fight for, where on an industrial basis, the prison system have not only incarcerated in America 2 million people, but in this country, the level of incarceration is the highest in the whole of Europe, something like 85,000 people sent to prison. I dealt with a case of a racist murder in prison in 2000 years when I was coordinating the Stephen Lawrence family campaign. A young man called Zaid Mubarak, only 19 years old, who'd been incarcerated, sentenced to prison for 6 months for stealing 7 pounds of razor blades, was put in a cell with a known racist called Robert Stewart, who had a swastika on his forehead. He wrote 220 letters while he was sharing the cell with Zaid Mubarak. Every single letter was signed by a swastika. In a month before he killed Zaid Mubarak, he gave a chilling description of how he would kill his padmate, cloak a pillow like a Ku Klux Klan with a burning cross, and move out of the cell. What happened to him? That letter that he wrote was given back to him. Zaid was killed on the 4 hours before he was released by Robert Stewart. The point I'm making is that the nature of brutality in youth offending system has been known. It's obnoxious. It's never been dealt with. You had a public inquiry on the Zaid Mubarak case, just like the Stephen Lawrence case, which came to the same conclusions of institutional racism. And during that inquiry, this was the important bit, the Director General of Prisons had this to say. He said 80% of the people in prison should have never been in prison because they had mental health problems. And that accounted for 92% of women. This is the Director General of Prisons saying 80% of the people in prison, that's 80% of 85,000 people, should not be behind bars because of reoffending. This is the state of incarceration in this country. UK has a horrific experience of institutionalized systemic forms of racism and police brutality. I've already listed the figures. Only last month, just in an area called Tottenham, we had 2 serious tasers. One of a guy called Millard Scott, 62-year-old one who nearly died, and another of a guy called Jordan Baker, who's paralyzed. Tasered only 13th of May this year. Yet, nobody, including the police, has apologized to those families about how that process took place and how they've been apologized. So the Black Lives Matter movement has sharpened the focus, put the focus of state complicity in relation to Black lives, and has begun to raise questions of how these issues can be tackled. So if you look at the beginning and the developments of the Black Lives Movement, the movement, when it was developed in 2014 by 3 women, the issue is obviously not just about policing brutality. There is recognition of transgender, strengthening of women within the Black communities, intergenerationality amongst different communities, globalization in terms of having a common viewpoint and problems amongst Black communities throughout the world. The issue of reparations and slavery is another format that's been used, etc., etc. And those movements have been developed in this country due to the issue of the colonial movement, etc. But what's happened in the UK on racism, devoid of any understanding of institutional racism, is that racism, especially when it's been used as a notion of hate crime, has become devoid of any understanding of colonial history. A hate crime is an incident that can be used against anyone. It doesn't have the context. It doesn't have the political impact. People just use it on an individual basis rather than a collective experiences. So the framework has created a hollow definition of anti-racism, racial acts and racism in this country as far as government bodies are concerned. So you have this spectacle of the International Holocaust Remembrance definition of anti-Semitism, which bears no context, no relationship to the definition of racism experienced through colonialism, etc., etc. It marginalizes Black and Brown histories as well as presence and voices in that definition. So you have a living example of Palestine, for example, where the Palestinians can't even, under that definition, explain their existence, the formation, and the colonial experience, a living colonial experience in this country. And so,
Suresh, could I ask you to wind up now?
The Black Lives Matter movement is reshaping the definition of anti-racism in this country, thrusting into a more solid anti-colonial definition that used to exist in the past. Sorry, I've gone on because I didn't hear anyone. I just thought
no, thank you very much indeed, Suresh. That's brilliant. And again, a real lot to think about there. Really, really powerful contribution. I've got a few more questions that I'd like to try and cover before we finish in 15 minutes. We're finishing at 4:30. So I don't know if any of the speakers are going to show themselves. But I've got a question from Matthew Hurry. He says, with so many corporations and organisations apparently only paying lip service to the movement, I'm worried that some people are expecting it to all blow over without them having to act to bring about real change. What's the best way we can prevent this and continue the momentum and force real change where it's needed? So, who would like to? Bianca, do you want to go first on that? How can we force the real change?
I don't really have an answer, to be completely honest with you. I think just completely remembering, as Hilary said earlier, that this is not a moment, it's a movement. So just keeping moving forward, educating people best we can, and just keep spreading awareness, I think.
Yeah. Maya, you got a new
yeah, probably just holding places accountable, because I've had schools say to me, right, we're now going to become completely anti-racist. So then I've gone back to them the week after they've said that and said, oh, since you made that statement, what have you done? like challenge the workplaces and challenge different institutions so that they are held accountable for the words that they've said. And then it cannot just be words and just networking in numbers, really, because when there's a huge force of people all wanting collective change, then change will happen. And we can see that with the Black Lives Matter movement globally, there's so many people all fighting for the same thing, and that's why change is happening.
Absolutely. Julia, something from stateside?
Yeah, I mean, as I was saying before, corporations are all trying to do that, to declare themselves allies of the movement. Meanwhile, you know, exploiting their workers. We're still in the middle of a pandemic. In the United States, the numbers are growing, and most of the people who are contracting and dying from COVID-19 are Black people and Latino people, immigrants. And so I think that, and with us also, the economic crisis, there looks like there's going to be attempts of evictions in a mass way. Those are going to affect Black people disproportionately. Anything that's bad in the society is going to hurt Black people disproportionately because society's racist, and it's based on racism. But you know, I think that those objective consequences are not avoidable. You know, evicting massive amount of Black people and Latino people, which the sheriffs and law enforcement are going to be doing, the layoffs that are going to hit Black people disproportionately. They won't be able to cover up those contradictions. They're not going to be able to cover up the obviousness of the racism that's going to hit those people and this movement, because it's multi-ethnic and it's anti-racist, and so many other groups of people are participating in it. I don't think they'll be able to hide behind those real consequences. People not having homes, people not having food, and people dying from this pandemic are just real life consequences. So my hope, though, is that we continue to fight against not just the things that are just particularly in front of us, but against these systems of oppression and colonialism, and now, you know, capitalism and imperialism. So I think, as other folks have said, uniting the struggle against racism with the struggle against, you know, for jobs and against evictions, I think is a way that we'll be able to really stay strong and kind of build ourselves more as a political force independent of the two, you know, capitalist parties. I think that's something.
Thanks, Julia. I've got a question popped up from Andy Phillips to Suresh in particular. He says, do you have a link to a document detailing all those indicators of racism? So if you've got any links that could help people with that information, Suresh, I don't know if you could put that in the chat box to share for people, that would be brilliant.
Yeah.
Then now I've got one from Adam Yohannes. This links to points being made earlier on about trade unions and the economic factors as well in particular. He says 4,000 essential workers are currently on strike in East London against Tower Hamlets Council. Unison Black Workers, that's Unison Trade Union Black Workers section, made the point that while their council leader pledges support for BLM, the council makes cuts to council workers' pay and conditions that hit BAME workers hardest, as they are disproportionately low-waged workers. What do you think BLM can do to dismantle economic racism in terms of jobs, housing, etc., and challenge austerity that hits BAME people hardest? Well, that's a big fundamental question. Who would like to go first on that one? Anyone want to go on that one? Julia, go on.
Well, I have some comrades in New York who are nurses and doctors, and they formed an essential workers organizing committee that are really trying to fight, because essential workers, that's an inspiring strike to hear about. You know, the people who are working now in this crisis, not only are we more exposed to COVID, but it also shows that we're important. I mean, literally essential. So I think we really need to unite the workers' movement, and the workers' movement needs to not just adopt resolutions to support Black Lives Matter, which my union has done, but to really, that has to mean that we fight racism at work. That means we fight, you know, against the, like I said, the layoffs, which are going to affect Black and brown people disproportionately. And, you know, things like Strike for Black Lives, which is happening tomorrow in the United States. It's not really a strike in the sense of the strike that you're talking about, but we need a strike against racism. The port shutdown that happened on June 19th, which is known as the day that all Black people were emancipated from slavery in the US. There was a port shutdown of all the ports on the West Coast. That's billions of dollars. So we need to organize stuff like that, but not just as symbolic actions, but against all the ways in which capitalism oppresses us, especially in ways that are anti-racist. So I don't know if that answers the question.
Thanks, Adam. I hope you're happy with that. Bianca or Maia, you want to add something there around those economic issues, jobs, homes, and so on? If you're not unmuting yourselves. Oh,
yeah, I'd just say, probably like has been said, forming networks and then going and challenging the council and government in numbers with petitions, with people all going through the same thing together, rather than one individual trying to fight the fight for everyone. So I really do think, again, like networking is key, in forming groups that you're able to challenge different institutions and call people out together.
Yeah, thanks very much, Maia. Bianca?
Yeah, I was just going to say what Maia said, just to challenge the institutions really, and yeah, fight together.
Okay, yeah, unity, always good. Suresh, any comments around the trade union economic side?
I can't speak for the BLM movement, but I know that as far as the monitoring group is concerned, we are very conscious and actually engaged in a lot of struggles to do with Black and brown workers in UK. For example, you know, there are something like 3 million high exposure jobs that the essential workers are conducting during the COVID period, and they weren't allowed to self-isolate, for example. Most of them are women on part-time, poverty wages, temporary or zero-hour contracts, and that in many sectors in health and social care, you know, Black, minority, ethnic women are overrepresented, low paid, and there are lots of struggles taking place, and we're involved in that. And I think the issue of race and class and gender are key components of any movement that wants to grow. How that happens in practice for the BLM is something I can't comment on. I think it's going to come to the head in this country because there are a lot of Black workers who want to be recognized by the BLM movement, but because it's a non-hierarchical organization, the unions or independent organizations like ourselves or communities are supporting them at the moment. But you know, I think the issue of how capitalism has hit really hard, decimated economic sectors, even prior to COVID, is something that has affected very deeply BME workers and working people generally, and COVID is going to unleash a new austerity on poorer sections of our community. So there has to be a realignment of anti-racism with class and with gender. And it has to come, it will come. And maybe there'll be a larger movement with coalition building that takes place, which is what's actually needed in this country. By and large, the Black communities are working class. Unlike America, in this country, the brown community or the Asian community is 80% working class. They're not in the higher sectors. They were recruited as workers, they've been members of trade unions. And when it comes to Black and brown workers, men or women, they actually have a higher membership in the trade unions than the white workers themselves. So these struggles in communities and policing is going to enter into the workplace. And somehow, I'm not sure how organically that's going to happen, but I think what needs to shift is a real transformation and a radical root and branch outlook, a mindset to do that. At the moment, that exists within socialist currents within Black communities. It doesn't exist generally with BLM. Maybe it will exist because it's a very new embryonic movement looking at policing and structural racism. So I think you can't ignore the problem. It's something that needs to happen and something needs to develop. But it depends on two things, I think. Where the trade unions can go above their trade unionism or economic determinism or economic centrism and start looking at how to support Black communities on a political level. And for Black communities think that working struggles are part of their community struggles. And that shift has to take place because, the question that the person asked is very, very important. There are lots of labor councils using hashtag BLMs now and trying to support them, but actually on a day-to-day basis, they don't support working class struggles or trade union movements. In my own town, Southall, which is predominantly Black and brown, we have huge austerity cuts, selling of public assets, massive unemployment taking place. And we have a campaign which is linked to racism and policing, but we've been forced under COVID conditions to have mutual aid programs. So we have a food program. I think Hilary has a food program in Wales for people who are poorer. So we've been delivering food to something like 330 households every other day in Southall and Greenford, because 90% of them are either Black, African Caribbean, or Asian, or migrants coming in. So you have to link up with the issue of poverty and also to do with assets. For example, in Southall, there's only one Black business owned and managed by two members of the Black community. And it's being sold and demolished for regeneration or gentrification in Southall. So we've launched a campaign with the people to save Tudor Rose, which was a unique, iconic building, is a unique, iconic building, which promoted Black musical heritage, including modern musical heritage in this country. So you have those contradictions taking place. And I think Labour really, if Labour, I mean, I'm not a member of the Labour Party, but if you're going to have the trade union labor movement coming on the side of BLM, it has to stop this nonsensical statements made by Keir Starmer about it not being a movement but a movement, and then apologizing for it, and then sending himself to unconscious bias training. I think it's just not serious. It's just hilarious for me. And actually, it makes me angry because we've been fighting against systemic racism ever since we came here. And we've been, as a monitoring group, fighting for 40 years. And it belittles that momentum and movement, which is based on the manner in which African Caribbean, African Americans have been killed and discriminated by an agency which he says he loves and supports. I just find that extraordinary for a leader of the labor movement. So I think that radical shift has to take place, which has to be on socialist terms. How that takes place is very difficult. really, I'm sorry, when you ask me a question, I can't stop talking. Just shut me up. I'm sorry about that.
Okay, thanks very much, Suresh. Only because we've just gone slightly over time now, so apologies to the one or two questions that we didn't have time to answer. But I want to give a really, really big thank you to our speakers today. It was just brilliant, really brilliant, very powerful, moving. Big thank you to Hilary, who had to leave to go off to another meeting. But, you know, you're all doing absolutely incredible work. So thank you very much indeed. My final thing is to give a little plug. Oh, I don't know, I can get it because of my funny screen. Transform, a Journal of the Radical Left. We've got our latest issue is out now. This is a special issue on the coronavirus, all different perspectives. So that's available at prruk.org. I've put that in the chat. But really, Julia, Suresh, Maia, Bianca, thank you so much for joining us today. Big solidarity to you and all power to you in everything that you do. And let us know if there's anything we can do to support you, any more work you want to do with us. If you've got articles, you know, send them in and we'll be really proud to publish them. So thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Black Lives Matter. Fuck the police.